This story began 2 years ago. Back then I came across this project online, biting out of a modern take on the design of the Luaz, a Luaz from the future. At this point the project is almost finished and we're releasing episodes as we edit them. In the previous episodes we bought a donor car, started bringing it back to life, realized we were missing some parts, then bought another donor, completely rebuilt the entire suspension, differential and brakes, and made the rear steering axle. It's a really fun thing, see for yourself. And there's still a lot of interesting stuff ahead. So first we dismantled the engine and all related components and assemblies. This didn't take much time, since the car is extremely simple and straightforward. After 2 hours, we had an empty engine bay and our first surprises.
So this is what I dug out of our old frame rail. Everything is full of holes, everything is welded on in a weird way. So I made a new part. That's why I'm going to weld it in here. It's a bit thicker, has a bit more reinforcement, so the strength margin will be even greater. So now I'm welding the frame rail back in, restoring it, and then I'll move on to tidying up the entire engine bay. Extra brackets will be removed, holes will be welded up, the battery tray will be taken out, and the battery will be relocated to the cabin. So it's going to take a while to get all this done. It's exactly this kind of tedious work.
Basically, just to tidy up what we have. So, to properly install the steering gearbox, you need to know where the steering wheel will be positioned.
That's why we got a complete steering column like this one from a Citroën CF5, I think. It fits perfectly with our render and with what we want to achieve in the end. And you can find it at the scrapyard. We went, bought it, and it was reasonably priced. The cool thing about it is that its central part stays in place while the steering wheel itself rotates. It looks pretty futuristic, which is exactly why it suits us. But there's one problem with it. It's quite bulky and I have no idea yet how to fit it in there. So first of all, I'm probably going to partially disassemble it, remove everything unnecessary, everything we can do without taking it off. And ideally, I'd like to keep the adjustments. It can move forward and backward, and I'd also like to keep the up and down adjustment.
Well, now there's just a little left to do. I need to figure out the placement and mounting for the new steering wheel.
So it took quite a while. I was tinkering with it for a long time just to get it at least somewhat. I finally managed to position the steering wheel, removed everything unnecessary, the pedal assembly. I think the steering wheel will be comfortable. It needs to be installed. To do this, I temporarily welded 2 studs here and hung the steering wheel on them. And based on that, I can move the steering wheel up and down toward me or away from me. With the stack welds, everything moves, and with the threads, it can be raised or lowered. It's already a bit more comfortable. But again, this isn't the final position. The steering wheel, I need to hold a pedal assembly, most likely. The pedal assembly, a classic 2101 model. It's small, designed for non-vacuum brakes, a standard clutch. I think it'll just fit here because of its very size. Here's the approximate position of the hydraulic cylinder. That's how it turns out. It looks like there won't be any extreme angles for the universal joints. Only this hole needs to be moved higher. Now I'm going to make a mount, some kind of mount on the frame rail. I think I'll also have to reinforce it from somewhere else here. And so that, unlike before, the frame rail doesn't flex.
Of course, in our line of work, there are no ready-made solutions or installation kits. But you always have a sheet of cardboard and thick metal at hand. If you add some elbow grease to that, you get the following result.
Prepared a set of plates like this for mounting the differential to the body. This plate will be bolted here, and it will tie the differential to the firewall, while this plate, following the principle of our old mount, will tie the differential to the frame rail.
From here on, everything is clear and straightforward. We're assembling the setup with tack welds for now, as there will clearly be new adjustments later on.
So the drive shaft arrived, the steering shaft that fits our power steering, which I wanted to use to connect everything together. In my mind, after looking at the pictures, I thought this part goes to the power steering and we would just bolt it on like this. But it turned out that the splines we need are on this part of the shaft, so there's no way I can do this without welding. So now I'll probably heat up this part. There's some poured plastic in there, and take this section out. I'll cut off the unnecessary parts here and then weld it all together. This is the result I got after preparing everything. It's really great that the original Niva shaft fits. This rod goes right in here. So I'll put 3 spot welds here and weld it all around here. That means the strength margin of this connection will be more than enough. So nothing is stopping us from moving forward.
Next, Kolya continues following his own plan. And we have
this result. Spot welds, there's the rod. We bought this kind of pedal assembly from a 2101. Of course, it's the best fit for use relatively compact. Of course, we'll still have to modify it, but we also have the main master cylinder from the 2101 here. I'll carefully bend it to precisely fit on the spot, but the brake pedal, it's like the metal doesn't really want to give at all. It's significantly thicker and therefore absolutely needs to be heated. Unfortunately, we don't have anything readily available to heat it locally, no proper torch, so we'll probably just have to re-weld it entirely. This is ultimately how our finished pedals will look. This is most likely their final position. It's all pretty comfortable for me. Nothing gets in the way of my feet. Everything fits. All that's left is to decide on the gas pedal. We found this pedal from an Escort. It's completely made of metal. That means we can cut, bend, and re-weld it. Now I'm going to make some mock-ups, trying to figure out how to mount the steering column, because we don't have any kind of structural support ring at all. That's all there is. That's really all there is. It's flimsy. The only structural part here is this, and on that side too. So most likely I'll insert a tube inside from the top here, and maybe I'll tie it together with another tube from below. Then between these two tubes, I'll attach both the column and the pedal assembly. There's some kind of flange here, but now I'll start figuring all of this out.
In the end, to install the steering column, Kolya came up with this kind of plate. He welded it up nicely, and now we can move on.
I made the first part of the steering column mount and ran into the problem that there's nowhere to attach it. Everything around is just so flimsy, not sturdy at all. I measured the niche. This one up here is just a bench sheet, and a 50 by 25 profile fits in here perfectly. I bought a wall thickness of 2 millimeters. So the goal now is to carefully fit it inside here, and by doing that, we'll also connect the two side parts. This post right here. And to this tube, I'll tie in both the top of the steering column and the pedal assembly. So now I'm cutting out everything unnecessary from here, removing anything that gets in the way, like all these little hooks inside, and installing the tube. And then I'll use the tube as a base to attach all the steering components.
In the end, it was decided to remove all unnecessary parts and properly reinforce the mounting point for the steering column and the future dashboard. We ruthlessly cut off the structures that no longer fit, clean everything up, remove the steering wheel, and fit the future reinforcement. This is just a regular profile tube, which fits here perfectly. Let's take another look at the render. In the end, we need to end up with a steering wheel like this, with a built-in display. That's exactly why we chose this option, so you wouldn't have to invent the whole mechanism from scratch. That is, the central part of the steering wheel remains stationary. In the end, only the main structure will remain from this French steering wheel, and will completely redesign the look to match our render as closely as possible. Once everything is precisely fitted, we prime the panel from the inside, also prime the profile, and weld it into its proper place. As a result, we got a reliable, rigid base to which we can now attach the steering column, which is exactly what we're doing now.
We've installed the steering wheel and pedals for now, and I think that for the mock-up stage, this is more than enough. Right now, we're just figuring out where all components will be installing will go. New ones, column, pedals, everything in place, comfortable. I'm sitting here, it seems like my hand's in more or less correct position. The steering wheel adjusts towards you, down or up. The seat moves forward to find a comfortable position. We leave these components and move on. Meanwhile, as I was installing this, we were searching for selecting and ordering the remaining parts, since our main goal was still to replace the engine. And now, let's go, I'll show you what we've carefully found and selected for you. Start with the basics. A new engine. Conditionally new the engine is a used import from a dismantler. A 1.9D with a 1Y code, considered new with 154,000 kilometers. That's the stated mileage. For a Volkswagen diesel, that's basically new. Let me explain why we chose this particular engine. There was an option not much more expensive to get a turbo diesel engine, which would have been much more powerful, better, more fun. With the turbo within it would have been awesome. But with the LuAZ, the transmission has a very limited margin of strength, so a much more powerful engine would have required replacing the entire transmission. That's the first factor. The second factor is that, as you can see in our render, the front part of the car narrows, so we didn't want to add any extra equipment like an intercooler, turbo, additional piping, or anything like that. That's why we settled on the simplest, most reliable engine, which would take up less space, and it seems to fit all our requirements. It's not very powerful, but it's got good torque, and I think it'll be enough for us. We bought it right away in its first complete set, meaning it came with the alternator, power steering, starter, pump, and everything else. As for the engine, we'll definitely have to modify and redo some things. The first thing that caught my eye was the oil filter. Here we have the steering rod running through. We'll have to solve this issue. We'll also need to address the clutch issue and the coolant outlet at the back. Well, I think some other small things will come up along the way. So now I really need to put on some gloves, because I'm going to show you precisely what we had installed here before. Previously, we had this kind of adapter plate installed. Basically, it did its job and served its purpose, but we weren't really satisfied with how it looked. That's why we bought this one to replace it. A new one. It was just bought online. They're not custom made or anything, people just make them and sell them freely for conversions. For converting a LuAZ to a diesel engine, the second thing we had installed was this clutch kit. That includes the pressure plate, the disc, and the flywheel. What was the issue? Remember when we went off-roading, when we drove into the swamp, the clutch was smoking a lot? That happened for two reasons. First, it was a bit too weak on its own, and it wasn't installed quite correctly because the pressure plate was 190 millimeters. The disc was 200 millimeters, and the flywheel was for a 200 millimeters clutch. That's why there are these scuff marks on the pressure plate here. The pressure plate's fingers are bent, and overall it looks overheated and not in great condition. There are actually no complaints about the flywheel. As for the disc, basically there are no issues with it. Either it's not new, but it could still be used for a while, so well, we'll replace it too. But just for the record, I'll show you exactly what we're going to install instead of all this. The flywheel, we are definitely keeping the old one. A 200 millimeter clutch disc was selected and purchased specifically for this flywheel. It fits the flywheel perfectly. And if I remember correctly, a pressure plate from some Volkswagen was also selected for a 200 millimeters disc. And it aligns precisely and mounts onto our flywheel. For this whole setup, a release bearing was also selected, which will have to be adapted to the original Louis release bearing, so that all of this works. To operate all of these, a clutch master and a slave cylinder were purchased. And that's basically everything regarding the transmission. Let me explain why we settled on a 200 millimeters disc and why we didn't keep the larger clutch that comes with our new 1.9 engine. The clutch will be our weak point. It's easier to burn out the clutch than to break the transmission, tear the gearbox, or snap the axles. It's better if our clutch slips, it's a consumable and much easier to replace.
I think Kolya explained all the theory in great detail, but as we know, theory often differs from practice, so without hesitation we decided to move on to the practical part.
Out of curiosity, I put all this together, even without bolts for now. We put the plate on and it fits. The flywheel also fits, and I've already tried fitting it to the gearbox. It fits the gearbox as well. The plate is still a bit rough, it needs a little finishing. And there's another important detail. I have read that when installing this particular kind of setup on the stock UAZ gearbox, it is absolutely necessary to install a specific component. This little bearing, which is installed right here, I picked it out, found the part number on drive 2, I think got it, and installed it. This little bearing supports the input shaft of our gearbox. Originally on the Volkswagen, it's not installed here, there's just a hole butt for us, it's essential, so we'll install it here.
Well, next we'll put into practice everything Kolya came up with in theory. We machine the missing components and refine the unfinished parts of the adapter plate.
So I've almost got everything ready to install the engine and gearbox into the car. I had to modify the adapter plate we received. I drilled holes for the starter and tapped threads in them. I tapped threads for mounting the gearbox itself and widened them. These grooves here are but to make sure the socket fits and everything is convenient, the starter will be relocated. It's on this side for us, and it just bolts on with 2 bolts, everything's great, everything's convenient. I also ordered the original engine mount from Louis because ours was really worn out. Some windows were cut out, something was welded on. I decided it would be easier to order another one, not a new one, just a different one. We'll clean it up, paint it, and bring it in. I made a mock-up of the gearbox input shaft on the lathe to make it easier to align the clutch. That's what I did. And we bought all the fasteners we needed. All the fasteners are grade 10.9, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of strength, so everything should fit just fine. Now we can already start installing everything on the engine. I've already test fitted everything 10 times, taken it off, put it back on. But now we can finally assemble everything for real, connect the engine to the gearbox, and try fitting it all into the car. The only thing we're missing is the release bearing. But that's on its way to us too, and it will also be custom made. So for now, we can test fit the layout even without the release bearing. So now I'm assembling everything, the plate on the engine, the flywheel, and so on.
And finally the final assembly, after which we'll see exactly where we stand. Let's go over the logic of what's happening one more time. In order to start working on the exterior, meaning building the new body, we need to install all the main components, which later on won't be possible to move, trim, or otherwise change their position. And mainly, that component is the engine. Basically, we're going to build the front end of the car around it.
engine is in place. There were no major surprises when we installed it. In terms of design, this engine and the previous one are very similar. We use ready-made solutions, so overall everything went smoothly. The only thing is the oil filter. We need to modify it, remove the heat exchanger from it, and install the filter itself lower and with a smaller volume. We'll most likely compensate for this heat exchanger with an oil cooler on the other side. That side is empty and unloaded. Everything is on this side. And then all sorts of little things with the cooling system well, there are plenty of minor things that need to be refined, but we won't be making any major changes. So we'll remove the heat exchanger and install a smaller oil filter. And in this way, if we still find the heat exchanger insufficient, we'll install a radiator on the other side. We'll need to redo a couple of pipes for the cooling system here. The flange at the back needs to be redone. And there are some other additional details as well. And since we're still at the prototyping stage, even though it might not seem logical, we really need to start working on the exterior now so that our render doesn't critically conflict with reality. So for example, in our render, the front narrows, but in reality, at the end of the car's front overhang, we have a very wide engine. And now, in order to fit and combine all this together so that it looks as close to the render as possible, we basically need to start working on the exterior already. So now we'll be simultaneously dealing with the crucial task of installing the engine, meticulously handling the small, intricate details, and at the same time working on outfitting the entire exterior of the car. So after the initial first fittings, we carefully compared what we have with our original render, and it immediately became clear that the overall height of the entire engine doesn't work for us. It's too tall. In our render, the front end, it narrows toward the front, and the engine is just too tall. To put it simply, there's nothing to cut off here, nothing to move either, so Sanya came up with a great solution. To lay the engine on its side, like it's done in the Volkswagen T3 Transporter, there it's positioned almost completely on its side well, almost horizontally, and there are even ready-made solutions for this. In theory, we just need to buy an oil pan and an oil pickup. And we'll just rotate the engine on the gearbox as much as possible between our frame rails to lay the engine on its side. This way, we'll lower its height and it'll make it a bit easier for us to work with the layout of the outer part of the body later on. So now we're going to give it a try. We've rotated the engine, and basically its current position is a compromise. We could have turned it a little more, but there are already a lot of positives. That wouldn't have given us any benefit, but it would have caused us a lot more trouble. Now, with the engine rotated, the issue with the oil filter has also been automatically resolved, as well as everything that was interfering with the steering linkage. At the moment, it seems like nothing is in the way, but now there's a problem with the exhaust manifold. It's hitting the frame rail. We'll most likely solve this by replacing from a naturally aspirated manifold to a turbo manifold, and we'll just weld the muffler where the turbo outlet is. Other than that, it's all very, very positive. The engine is now significantly lower by approximately 8 to 10 centimeters at its highest point. I don't really know if that's quite enough for our specific needs, but it's already much, much better than before, so we're definitely sticking with this excellent option. Regarding the oil pan, we have some important updates. Most likely, we'll use an oil pan from a B5 Passat, which has an engine that's roughly tilted the same way as ours, so we'll try to get out of this situation using factory solutions. So this is roughly the position the engine will be in. When everything was still on the car, I made 2 marks. Now we've taken everything off, put it on the floor, and I've lined them up. And now you can see what goes where. It's very convenient to work with this plate and with the gearbox. And I can just align the engine with the gearbox right on the floor because the plate has a lip and the gearbox has a recess. One fits onto the other just like a mounting seat, and you can rotate it exactly as you want. The alignment of the input shaft and the clutch isn't lost because of this. Everything is perfectly positioned, and it's just so convenient to rotate and choose the position like this. This position is less ideal because most of the fasteners are here. Where to place it, how to mount the gearbox on. In principle, the tilt angle suits us. All that's left is to buy the oil pan. I've already removed the manifold, and we've ordered the manifold from a turbocharged car. It'll arrive soon as well, and we'll be modifying it. That's it. The only thing that bothers me is that the gearbox was messed up. The gearbox bell housing before us When the guys installed the engine, they made a huge hole for the starter. Yesterday, installing the starter, I cut out another half a centimeter. Now I need to cut out another huge opening. But the gearbox situation is still unclear. This is our old gearbox, the broken one. The one where a reverse gear pops out, it howls and makes noise, it creaks, it needs repair and service, but no one wants to do it. So we'll either buy another gearbox or give this one to someone. If we buy another gearbox, then I'll carefully cut out a proper opening for the starter. And this one will remain as our mock-up, so some things are forgivable with it. Now, everywhere it's possible, I'll drill and tap threads. Where it's not possible and it's better to make it through, I'll use a through bolt, and then we'll put this machine back together. And that will be our final mock-up installed engine. Here's our gutted gearbox. Here's what I cut off yesterday, is 5mm wearing away. And this area here, we still need to cut off so the starter can fit in from that side. About the groove I mentioned to you, here you can see it clearly. There's a recess inside here and a ridge here, and one rides smoothly on the other, which helps us position the engine and the gearbox. It's time to make a decision. Another related question about the release bearing. We had this thing here, I don't even know what it's called. It looks like a Volkswagen bearing. I checked, and most people doing these swaps use the original bearing. From the LuAZ, they take out just the bearing itself, leaving only the race. And then using an adapter and a spacer, they press in and install a bearing from a Zhiguli. This is how it will look, and its length will compensate exactly for what we're missing. That's why I decided to do it this way. Now I'll take this one apart, machine a spacer ring for it, and put it all together.
As a result, the final challenge for installing the engine was solved using the method described above. And now, with peace of mind, we can move on to working on the exterior. First of all, we remove everything unnecessary. In our case, that means the doors and the frame that used to hold the soft top.
Alright, let's move on to the next stage of working with the LuAZ. Here we have the external body frame. We asked the designer for the main dimensions. We'll use those as a starting point and assemble the entire outer frame from there. We'll be using 30x30 pipe with a 2mm wall thickness. And we'll take a slightly different approach this time compared to how we assembled, say, the same bukhanka. We won't be welding everything directly on the car and trying to align it all there. Instead, we'll weld it separately. We'll build the frame directly according to the drawings. And once the frame is ready well, mostly ready, not completely finished, just the frame itself, we'll fit the main part of the frame onto the car, and from there adjust the car to match the frame. This way we'll most likely be able to get closer to how it looks in the render, and all our parts will line up. It all depends on how accurately I can assemble everything.
In the end, Timur Daudov is the author of the project. He adjusted the model specifically for our wheelbase and made this drawing for us. And based on this drawing, Kolya is welding the metal frame, which will serve as the foundation. Later on, we plan to cover it with sheets of fiberglass, and at this stage, it seemed to us that making such a simple angular body would be a very easy task. Weld a couple of profiles, throw on a sheet of fiberglass, and it's done. In reality, it turned out to be a bit more complicated, but let's go through everything step by step.
So we carefully put our rough frame onto the car, just to see whether our digital render, the precise dimensions in our render, actually match the real-world dimensions of the car. It's pretty clear that the dimensions are all okay. The front end lines up, but the rear, obvious well, I could tell from the measurements and everything that it's shorter. Now I can clearly see what I need to cut off, and I already noticed a couple of mistakes in how I started assembling our frame. Specifically, in the positioning of the pipes, two pipes aren't positioned the way I originally intended. I'll probably take it off again now. And then I'll cut out the rear part so I can lower it more into its place. These pipes are still solid for now. They're mostly just for support. there will be a door here, a doorway. But overall, our picture is already starting to match the render.
In the end, we decided to move forward with small but confident steps, adding one element at a time and checking the fit after each change.
So after yesterday's fitting, it became clear that in order to fully lower the rear part and fit everything, we need to remove the excess. So now I want to cut off everything that's in the way and everything that's in bad condition. I'll probably remove the rear wheel arches right away, because with the wheel angle, the rear arches were getting in the way and we have to completely redo them anyway. So now I'll just cut it off like this with the floor, leaving only the frame rails, because later we'll need to tie the new body to them.
As a result, with each new fitting, we had to cut more and more of the body. That's what we're doing once again, realizing that it's easier to build everything from scratch than to try to fit and adapt to existing panels. But every time it feels like this time will be different, and it seems like, how can you keep the factory floor, the door pillars and so on? Until you realize that almost nothing from the above is actually left. And only then, with a clear conscience, do you cut off the last scraps of panels and are left with a bare frame. But you have to reach that point, and that's what we're working on.
This is what the assembled frame looks like. We placed it closer to the car so I could roughly understand what might get in the way right away. And it's clear that the whole side here is going to be in the way. At first I thought I wanted to keep this pillar somehow, to tie things to it or something, but it just wobbles around, so it doesn't really make sense to keep it. And it seems like we need to cut everything off the outer panel, cut it off completely, like this. And right here, at the end of these cross members, the cross ones, and most likely that's exactly where we'll be tying and attaching things, especially since here on the farm we need to weld on some kind of brackets anyway, so it's not a big loss to cut it. And the car itself, well, at first it seemed like it would be a shame to cut it, but once we started we realized there wasn't much to regret. So now I'm completely removing this entire arch. Down here you can clearly see that it was previously repaired before, but unfortunately it was done very poorly, so we are taking it out. This part is still in place. I'm cutting here as well. It's all cracked over there. I don't even know, maybe it was pointless, I wanted to fix it. It's not really load bearing. And here along the floor contour we're removing everything as well. The arches, I'll probably leave them for now.
As you can indeed see, with each new fitting there was less and less left of the car, which is truly what you're seeing on the screen at this moment.
We put our frame onto the car itself. The overall concept and proportions look great, but we ran into a few issues. The arches. The main issue is the arches. We ended up with a huge rear arch and a very small gap in the front arch. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out where our problem was. Why aren't we matching the blueprint, even though we tried to be as precise as possible? We concluded that most likely the size is off. I started from this measurement, but the designer, when developing it, used a slightly different measurement. And as a result, the whole body shifted forward by, well, about 100 to 120 millimeters or 12 centimeters. So now we've decided that just to make the final render accurately match the real world reality, I'll simply cut it here and I'll extend the body by 100 millimeters to the back. Here we've made a rough outline out of cardboard, and based on that, we've made our decision. So now we're taking it off again and putting it on our makeshift jig on the table, and there I'll be welding it further. And then we'll try it on again and see how it looks in the new version.
Yes, at this stage we've encountered some discrepancies with the render. Originally this project was designed as a standalone car, not as a body kit for an existing Lua Z. That's exactly why these kinds of difficulties are arising. After I wrote to the project author's Instagram, of course we'll leave in the video description. So after I got in touch with Timur, he gladly agreed to join this project, that is, to build a real prototype. That's when we started adapting the design, which was drawn from scratch. The concept to the actual wheelbase? The best part is that the concept in the picture is very similar in terms of parameters and dimensions to the real Luas. This happened on the one hand by chance, but on the other, it was natural since the concept embodies a Lua Z model from the future. And visually you can immediately recognize the Lua Z here thanks in part to its size and proportions. Now, as we get closer to the final assembly, we've decided to slightly change the concept. As a result, it will be quite different from the renders we've been showing you over the past few months. In the end, the vehicle will be designed in the style of an expedition SUV. There will be 2 seats in the front, and various boxes and storage compartments will be placed in the back. On top, on the roof, we'll install a tent. And there will be plenty of other useful features as well. So the intrigue remains, and the final appearance will be very different from what you expect. By that point, it became clear that leaving local patches of sheet metal on the floor no longer made sense, and they were only making further work more complicated. And as you can see, Kolya is ruthlessly removing everything.
This is what our bare frame looks like. I've already cut off the most obviously unnecessary mounts here. There were all sorts of little things in the back. I also removed the central cross members. They would get in our way. These ones will probably get in the way in the future too. But for now, I left them. Removing them shouldn't be a problem. The frame is in good condition. There are no through holes, cracks, or anything like that. There is some noticeable surface corrosion present on top, but it can be easily cleaned off. So now I'm going to thoroughly clean all of that. I'll then grab some different wheels to continue the process. Those coral ones, flap wheels, those coral ones. So I'll be cleaning it off. We cut everything out because there were a ton of these kinds of overlaps. Someone re-welded it at some point and didn't really bother to do it properly. And we decided not to leave it like that anymore. We decided to do it more or less properly, even though honestly we hadn't planned to at all. To get into it, to tear it apart this extensively, we wanted to keep as much of the original as possible, but as always, the deeper you go, the less of the body is left.